Looks like folks are starting to filter in. We've got a great session planned for you here. I would like to welcome everyone to Leading Through Fear with John Hagel, who is the founder and CEO of Beyond Our Edge. I'm Berit Anderson, COO of Strategic News Service, and I will be leading our conversation today. So at the end of our conversation here, we'll have about 20 minutes of interview with John and I, and then we'll have 10 minutes for audience Q&A. So if you have questions for speakers during our conversation, please drop them in the chat and we'll call on you directly at the end. You'll be muted throughout the session and the session is on the record. But once we switch to Q&A, we will be calling on you directly to ask your questions. So be sure to unmute yourself in advance of that. So John, you have been a long-time FIRE attendee and speaker, and you recently retired from a very long and successful career at Deloitte, where you founded the Center for the Edge. And I'm curious if you could tell the rest of the Future Interview community here what you've been up to since then. I know you have some big plans in the works for what comes next.
Oh yeah, no retirement in the future for me. I retired from Deloitte for a variety of reasons, but one was to finish a book that I'd been trying to write for 3 years called The Journey Beyond Fear, and finally got it out in March of last year. And I've been focused on trying to spread awareness of the key themes of the book since then. And my plan, actually starting this month, is to work on creating a new center that will offer programs based on the book to help people in the journey beyond fear. So I'm excited about it for sure.
That's very amazing. So clearly we are currently living through a time of immense fear and uncertainty. You know, Russia has just invaded Ukraine. Climate emergency is getting worse and worse. We have all kinds of issues around supply chain. If you are a leader currently trying to lead through this time, how do you think about overcoming that?
You know, it's certainly a challenging time, no question about it. But I think one of the problems we're facing is that leaders are falling into more and more of what I would call a threat-based narrative. That, you know, there's somebody coming to get us, we're all going to die, we need to mobilize now and resist. It could be anything from climate change to Russians to, you know, God knows what. But I think the need is for leaders that will really shift the focus to what I call opportunity-based narratives, where you're really helping to inspire people to say, what amazing things could we accomplish if we all came together? And driving that. Again, I think leaders are at many different levels in the society, but I think corporate leaders, for example, are falling into what I call the burning platform message, which is, you know, we're in a burning platform, it's going to collapse. If we don't mobilize now, we're all going to die. And so versus really focusing on what amazing opportunities are out there that we have not yet been able to achieve, but if we came together, we could. And I think that's what's missing. And I think it's what's required to move beyond the fear. The threat-based narratives feed the fear. Oh my God, things are terrible. Versus no, you know, we could accomplish amazing things. And it's a call to action to say, we have to move and act together. We can't just sit there and listen. We have to take action to address the opportunity, because there are barriers, there are obstacles along the way. This is not just, you know, rampant optimism without any challenge. No, we are facing challenges along the way, but keep the focus on the opportunity. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons that the head of the Ukraine at this point is as successful as he's been, is he's really focused on the opportunity for the Ukrainians. If we all stick together and come together as a country, we can accomplish amazing things. And yeah, we got armies invading, but it's all about the opportunity that I think inspires and excites people to get out into the streets and take action. So, yeah.
So I want to get more into so you have a whole like theory about how to construct a successful opportunity-based narrative, and I want to hear more about that in a second. But I'm curious to hear a little bit more first about, when you think about, we're living in such a polarized world, right? And currently, I think a lot of companies are struggling with the fact that we're seeing this shift in polarity where there are people who have a lot of money and those who don't, right? So inequality is increasing. The political gap is increasing. There's very little conversation between those two, the right and the left, not just in the United States, but around the world, that polarity is increasing. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about how to address that within this framework.
No, well, again, I don't want to suggest it's easy. There are a lot of divisions and disagreements that are separating people. But at the end of the day, I do believe that if we frame the right kind of opportunity, it will bring people together. That we'll realize, oh my God, I have the same interests and needs as the other people here. It's not just that we're on different sides of the aisle or whatever, but it's challenging. It's coming up with that opportunity that can bring people together and help them to overcome the polarity and divisions that currently are separating us and intensifying the separation over time. So it's, yeah.
So tell us more about like, how do you create that narrative?
Well, it's, it starts by looking ahead and really trying to anticipate, part of it's looking at the long-term trends that are shaping the society and the world. You want to frame an opportunity that is not just a fantasy. Mm-hmm. You want to frame an opportunity that's actually achievable. I mean, that's feasible and actually becoming more feasible given the long-term trends out there. So stay focused on how the world is evolving and what the opportunities are that could be created there, and focus again on what's really motivating and exciting people, not just framing it in terms of charts of data or whatever. It's really getting them to see that they could accomplish things that would never be feasible without coming together. I think then again, it's also the notion of being realistic about the challenges and obstacles. It's not just opportunity and nothing in our way. It's no, there are some significant obstacles, challenges. That's why we need to act. And then the focus on action, which is ultimately the key in the narratives as I talk about them. It's not just telling stories where you listen and can imagine what the world would be. No, it's a call to action to say, we need to come together and we need to act. And being clear about what is the impact that matters, so that people can start to measure, are we having impact? It's not just action for the sake of action, it's action to achieve that opportunity, and create a learning loop where people can learn together in terms of how to get even more impact over time. So there are many elements that have to come together, in my view, for a successful narrative.
One of the things that you have written about on your blog that I thought was very interesting is the idea that it is important in creating change that you create early and easy wins for people, right? And I think this is something that, for example, tech platforms excel at. It's why people are so addicted to Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, right? Because you have all of these tiny little easy wins, and they really very much design that into their user acquisition strategy, right? It's like as soon as you log in, you get a positive reinforcement of some kind. I'm wondering if you can talk more about how to do that without, outside of that realm. What does that look like if you're doing that within your organization?
No, well, just as background, very early in my career, I was a senior executive at Atari, so I was in the video game business.
Game design, yeah.
The key design principle in video games is those early small moves that can show some results that motivate people to invest even more time and effort in the video game. So I've come to believe, it was the subtitle of one of my books, small moves smartly made can set big things in motion. And so it's being thoughtful about, what are realistic moves that people can start to take at an early stage that will give them some sense of impact and motivate them to invest even more time and effort in it. And in a corporate setting, again, it's this notion of taking metrics and bringing them down to the level of individuals or small frontline groups to say, how could you have an impact that really would help the larger opportunity that we're trying to address? But it's being realistic about who these people are, what impact they can realistically make, and giving them real-time feedback in terms of how much impact are they achieving, so that they can iterate and learn from those efforts and accomplish even more.
And do you have advice for folks who may be like higher level leaders about how to foster that kind of mindset in younger or more developing leaders within their organization?
Yeah, it's complicated. Again, I think the leadership there's what I call a big shift in leadership that's going to have to occur. That, the leaders we have, and I'm going to generalize, but I think broadly true, the leaders of large organizations that we have today, and I'm not just talking about companies, governments, universities, everywhere. The strong leader is someone who has the answer to all the questions. No matter what the question is, you can count on the leader to have an answer to it. And if they don't have an answer, maybe it's time to get rid of them and get somebody who does. And I think it's the reason why trust is eroding in all of our institutions today, is because we have leaders who claim they have the answer to all the questions.
Right.
There are two possibilities. Either they're clueless as to how the world is changing, or they're lying. In either case, why would I trust them? I believe the mark of a strong leader going forward is a leader who asks the most powerful questions, who will say, and this is really exciting because if we came up with an answer, we could accomplish some amazing things, but I don't have an answer and I need help. It's that willingness to ask for help that I think can send a message back down into the organization. And number one, questions are not only welcome, they're necessary for impact. And we need to be willing to ask for help and come together to come up with answers to really powerful questions.
And that's a central tenet of entrepreneurship, right? Like when you hire for employees, you're not really looking for someone who can come to you with a problem. Anyone can come to you with the problem. You're looking for someone who can say, here's the problem. I've thought about what we could possibly do about this, and here are a couple of solutions we could move forward with.
Yeah, it's again, I think it's an interesting contrast between the entrepreneurs and small organizations. I've been in Silicon Valley now for over 40 years, and one of the things I really cringe at is this view that as these entrepreneurial companies start to scale, is that we need to bring in adult supervision. We need to bring in experienced executives, leaders who can scale this organization. And those are the leaders who have the answers to all the questions. It just crushes that entrepreneurial spirit and creativity that led to the early success of the companies.
I think, so there's this interesting thing that you write about, which is throughout most of business today, a lot of attention is spent on how do we increase the efficiency of the processes within our businesses. And that has been kind of the like gold star of, are you a good leader or not, right? Yeah. But there's a different way of thinking about how to run a business and how to make a business successful. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. No, it's another dimension of this big shift, as I describe it, is I believe all the large institutions around the world today are driven by an institutional model that I call scalable efficiency. The key to success for an institution is to do things faster and cheaper at scale. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to argue. I think for over a century, actually, we had institutions thriving around the world with scalable efficiency. The challenge in a more rapidly changing world is that model of scalable efficiency is actually becoming more and more inefficient. And in that kind of world, what we need are institutions where the focus is on helping everyone in the organization to learn faster so that they can come up with new approaches to address changing situations and create ever more value, not just focus on the cost side of faster and cheaper, but focus on how do we deliver more and more value to the participants, to the stakeholders that we're serving. And I think that's, again, requires fundamental change in the way we organize and operate our institutions, but absolutely critical to success. And I should mention too that when I talk about scalable learning, many people think I'm talking about training programs. Oh, we need more training programs. No, no, training programs are all about sharing existing knowledge. And while that's certainly, I don't want to dismiss that form of learning, the most powerful and necessary form of learning in a rapidly changing world is learning in the form of creating new knowledge that never existed before. And that's not going to happen in a training room. That's going to happen in the work environment, and with people coming together and acting and learning through action about the impact that they're achieving. And so, and it requires moving beyond, I mean, we all talk about research labs or innovation centers in large organizations. Now, I'm talking about every person in the organization, janitors in the facilities, people, maintenance people, salespeople, everyone. How can they learn faster and create more and more value that's meaningful to the stakeholders?
So we have about 5 minutes until, or actually maybe 3 or 4 minutes till Q&A. So if you have questions for John, please drop them in the chat and we will call on you. But John, I want to hear, so in all of this, conversation about inspiring people to change the way that they learn, or the way that empowering them to implement that learning, how do you think about actually putting that into play, right? Like, what does it look like to have an organizational culture that says not just, okay, now we're empowering you to learn, but you can actually do that, and here's how you can actually implement that learning?
Well, it varies. I mean, I think it's certainly, again, very challenging because it's going to require changing everything in the way we run our institutions today. And I'm quite literal about that. Everything has to change. I mean, an interesting example is one company that ended up creating experimentation platforms for every worker in their company.
Which company?
Not just in product development. Sorry?
What company was this?
Oh, Intuit.
Okay.
Financial services software. But basically, they created experimentation platforms for every worker in the organization. And again, not just product development people, but everybody, customer service and, operations, everybody had these experimentation platforms. And it sent a powerful message to the workers that it was okay to take risk, to experiment, that we're providing you with a platform that's going to manage the risk. It's not going to bring the company down. It's going to contain the risk, but we need those experiments. We need to come up with new approaches. And I think it was an interesting way to send a message to every worker that that's what was expected.
Amazon is also famous for that kind of approach of like experiment, and then throw away what doesn't work and move forward with what does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think the challenge is most large institutions are still in that old mindset of experimentation is off in the research lab somewhere, but everybody does, in the scalable efficiency model is every task that needs to be performed by the workers is tightly specified. We have process manuals that go into great detail of what the task is, how it's done. We standardize the tasks so they're done exactly the same efficient way throughout the organization. And we tightly integrate all the tasks so that we remove all those inefficient buffers. Where's the room for experimentation there? There's none. That's frowned on or punished if you deviate from the script.
So I'm gonna hand it over to Evan in just a second. But before we open it up for Q&A, you mentioned Intuit. We talked about Amazon. What other companies that you're seeing have really embraced this?
Oh boy, there aren't a lot. I think it's interesting. Actually, a lot of the companies, it varies depending on the context, but there are interesting companies in Asia that are doing things. Primarily, we haven't really talked about the whole notion of ecosystems, but if you're talking about scalable learning and just focused on learning within the organization you're in, you're never going to scale it to the extent of companies that systematically reach out and try to build relationships with third parties where they can learn faster together. And I think there are interesting models of that emerging, again, in Asian countries. There's in the motorcycle industry in China, there are some very interesting new models emerging there. And there's, well, I could go on there. I can't find any perfect examples yet because I think there's still, we're still in the early stages of big shift, but there are some that are starting to make the journey and learning from the experience for sure.
All right, and turn things over to Evan. Ev, do you want to grab some
Yeah,
audience
we have
questions?
some great questions in the chat. Good discussion going. So Mark had a question about how difficult or possible this is in a free world, or in a world with a free speech internet. Mark, are you there? Might have slipped out. If he did, oh, no, he's right there.
I was just allowed to unmute. I will thank the host. Yeah, so I am deeply concerned about this issue of the internet. And we had an eloquent person, I won't say who, at FIRE expressing a similar concern a couple days ago, telling us that, you know, we're seeing things about human nature unleashed that we didn't really want to know. Giving everyone a voice of equal power without equal education or good intent may have been a mistake. And so this is not really an elitist perspective. I think it's a survival perspective. You don't want to have chaos and the rule of the mob, but we are facing that daily. And so ask any Canadian how they feel about that. So, I worry about what I think are very good ideas that you're expressing. And yet we see every minute of the day people working their best, whether it's Russian misinformation groups or just angry right and left wingers trying to use the internet to make you angrier and angrier and angrier and more and more and more afraid, because fear is the best engagement, as Mark Zuckerberg well knows, the best engagement tool. So can we have free speech, you know, in a democratic society with an open internet and also live without fear?
I'm muting me here so I can actually speak free speech. No, it's I think it's an interesting question. I think clearly we're in a society where we're trying to crush each other, and to me, that what's missing again, you know, everybody talks about we biologically are driven by fear, you know, and I certainly at one level acknowledge that. I also ask, who have you encountered who actually has an aspiration to live in fear? Who wants to live in fear? I don't think there's anyone. I think we all have a hunger for hope and excitement, something that will really give us motivation and excitement about making a positive difference in the world. And I think that's what's going to be required to shift the conversation, to shift the discussion. I don't see anyone, frankly, out there, certainly in the big space, that's articulating a opportunity-driven narrative that can help to bring people together. So,
I muted him so we can't hear. You have a thought?
You and we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that was actually part of the conversation in the chat too. And it actually leads in, we don't have a lot of time left, but I think this is a good one to end on. Kevin, you had a question about who, Kevin Turner, for anyone who's trying to unmute him, had a question about who might exemplify this best. And we talked a little bit about that, but we can, I think, end on that note. Kevin,
well, it's simply a question. It's an open question. How do we find leaders that can exemplify that kind of concept in regards to an open honesty and transparency within our political and social discourse? What venue do we have to enable that to take place? Because clearly our media, our political discourse, and in most places we go, it's so swayed and colored and altered. It's hard for people to get any kind of concept of honesty and transparency of what's really going on.
No, again, I don't want to in any way underestimate the challenges that are being faced. There are a lot of vested interests that are seeking to hide behind the shield and not let everyone know that what's going on in reality. But again, my hope is that there will eventually be leaders that emerge that really focus on playing to opportunity. And I may be a bit controversial here, but I would say two of the most successful politicians in recent decades in the US, in my experience, one was Barack Obama in his first election campaign, and the other was Ronald Reagan. And both of them articulated opportunity-based narratives and really brought people out, and it got people excited. Unfortunately, they got consumed by the establishment and by the vested interests, and so they didn't persist in that opportunity narrative and really mobilize people in the way that was needed. But I would say we have a need for it, and I believe there will be people who eventually emerge with that focus, and that we're going to be a lot better off as a society as a result.
All right. Well, with that, we are at our time.
And I'm sorry. Let me just mention before everybody takes off. I'm very interested in getting more feedback and suggestions, both on the book, The Journey Beyond Fear, for those who have a chance to take a look at that. But even more importantly, as I mentioned, I'm wanting to create a new center that will offer programs based on the book. And I'm at an early stage, and suggestions in terms of what kinds of programs would be most useful and helpful would be deeply appreciated. So please, I have my website, johnhagel.com. I'm active on social media, so people can reach out in many different venues.
Fantastic. I feel like that's a very fire moment to conclude this session, because we are about action just as much as we are about talk. So don't hesitate to reach out to John. John is a doer, and he is creating a new center. Looking forward to seeing what comes of that, and looking forward to seeing if there are any kind of fire ideation things that happen here that wind up in it. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you after the break or perhaps during.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Take care.